I say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Mulberry. I'm with the IEEE Standards Association, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on Delivering the Future, Sustainable Maritime, and our extinguished, or distinguished, I should say, speakers. So as we get started, this year's STI Forum had a theme of advancing sustainable, inclusive, and evidence-based science and technology solutions and innovations for 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, with the objective of leaving no one behind. One of the critical resources we have on our planet Earth, and the most important, I think, are our oceans and how we treat them. So this side event specifically looks at electrification and really what the maritime industry is doing in terms of how to address a more sustainable ocean, as well as their approach to managing trade and all of the work that they do there. So that is the focus of our workshop, and I welcome you all to the discussion. What I'd like to do is turn it over to Rudy Schubert, who will be introducing our speakers and kind of setting the stage for how we are going to be discussing the topic today. So welcome, and Rudy, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Rudy Schubert, and I'm with the IEEE Standards Association, where I wear two hats, actually. One is being the lead for our energy-related standards and energy-related work, as well as what we call our Industry Connections program, which is where we put consensus groups together to collaborate on emerging technology topics. One of which we'll talk about a lot today is a maritime group that we formed a couple of years ago. One of our other speakers, John Prousalidis, chairs that group. I'll be introducing some of that work. John will go into much greater depth along with our other speakers that we have. So just a quick note on IEEE and IEEE standards for those less familiar with it. IEEE is a membership organization of engineers, technologists, people in the scientific community. We have about 500,000 members. I think we just passed the 500,000 mark earlier this year. Really looking at every discipline that one might imagine, ranging from power and energy to communications to robotics to AI. Really covered almost everything, doing numerous publications, conferences, and of course, standards, which is where I'm based. And we have somewhere on the order of about 1,500 published standards currently. There are always hundreds in development at any given time. And maritime is an interesting topic. If you go to the next slide, please, Karen. Oh, all right. I'm getting ahead of myself. First, so I did introduce myself real quickly earlier. John Prousalidis, I mentioned, is the chair of one of our sustainable maritime groups, and John is a professor of naval architecture and marine engineering at the National Technical University of Athens in Greece. We're also joined by Thomas Hervin, who's a senior electrical lead engineer with Siemens Energy. And we also have Alex Papalexopoulos. He is the CEO and chairman of the board for the World Energy Consortium. So we're very pleased to have such a distinguished panel of experts with us today. If we go to the next slide, some of the agenda we have, Karen gave the welcome remarks, and I'm just doing a few opening remarks. John's going to talk on electrification of ports and vessels and some of the standardization activities going on. Thomas will be talking about the standardization of marine utility connections. And then Alex will be focused on cold ironing for the energy transition and organized energy markets. We will try to make sure that we stay on track so that we have sufficient time for Q&A at the end. If you have any clarifying questions that the speaker can answer during the talk, please put that in the chat. We'll be all watching the chat if there's anything that we can address. But we will try to do the whole Q&A session all together during the latter part of the discussion. Next slide, please. All right. So as I had started to say, a few years back, as we were looking at a lot of the sustainable development work or sustainability standards activity, we were also looking at some of the energy work that we do, and the discussion came around to maritime issues, and it's rather interesting. I mentioned that IEEE covers a very wide range of topics, and we started thinking about maritime and marine engineering type of areas, because obviously it's another major discipline of engineering. But what we found was that when we looked across the IEEE, maritime issues tended to be addressed in numerous pockets. We didn't really have a centralized area like we have a power and energy society that focuses on all things energy. But within that, we have a IEEE Marine Systems Coordinating Committee, of which our speakers have been involved with as well. But that's just like one committee. That we also have like a transportation electrification, which was looking at the shipping industry in as one small element of what they're doing. We had some other areas that were doing very specialized standards. So, we realized that this is an important area, and we took on the initiative of forming one of these industry connections groups that I mentioned, with a focus on sustainable maritime, where our goal was really to bring together these pockets of experts and different programs around the IEEE to work more collectively and just amplify the messaging just by bringing more and more people together. Karen, if you go to the next slide, please. So we formed this in late 2022, and as I said, really is designed to bring together the expertise across the IEEE community, but then also to start looking outside of the IEEE community. Certainly, there are so many different organizations involved in maritime, both from an industry, from an academic, as well as different industry consortia, and everybody has a voice on different topics. But our goal was really to try to bring as many voices together as possible so that we are getting good collective views looking from all perspectives. From the IEEE perspective, one of our interests is where we could develop new standards, particularly around electrification of the maritime industry. And sometimes getting to the standards requires some reports, thought leadership type papers, and so we've looked at events. We've been trying to participate in more industry events to talk about how standardization will enhance sustainability. And really just looking to try to put a greater focus within the maritime industry across numerous topics, and you can see some of those that are in the boxes to the right there. As I started talking to John, who's chairing this committee that we have, we talked a lot about, certainly people talk about electrification of ships, but then where IEEE has a lot of expertise as well is, well, how do you get the electricity to the ports? So, you have grid to port, you've got port to ship, you've got what happens when the ship leaves the port. So, looking at it from many different angles on how electrification plays and how it really gets implemented in a scalable way that works and, is standardized globally. We've had a lot of success talking on these topics, and we're going to dig a bit deeper on all these topics as we go through our presenters today. So next slide, please, Karen. I just wanted to touch on one area that IEEE has done a lot of work and a lot of standards work is what we call the IEEE 45 series. And that has a lot to do with electrical installations that are shipboard. And we've had relationships with other standards organizations as well, where we've collaborated. But I don't want to speak in too great a depth because I want to leave that to John. I know some of this is part of his presentation as well. And I believe, if we go to the next slide, I believe I'm now going to introduce John Prousalidis, and he'll be our lead speaker to get us started today, talking on electrifications of ports and vessels. So John, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Rudy, for this overwhelming introduction. Yes, we can proceed to the next slide. And already Rudy has said quite a few words about IEEE and its motto, which is advancing technology for humanity. It's the biggest organization of engineers throughout the globe and so on. And among others, it is dedicated to develop standards. So among the 1,200 standards, one of the hottest ones seems to be nowadays not only the Wi-Fi, about the Wi-Fi connections, but also this story about providing supplying power to ships while they are in ports. And this is actually a joint effort of 3 standardization bodies, IEC, ISO, and IEEE. So next slide. Well, this is actually the mission and the strategic plan, let's say, of IEEE. I'm not going to stay too long about it. Everybody can find it in the web page, but this is actually the just an introduction to what IEEE deals with. So next slide. This is something that we should actually pay a little more attention to, because IEEE, besides being, let's say, dedicated to scientific targets, has also launched a more noble and more, let's say, friendly to non-scientists corps, like the initiative that it is called IEEE Planet Positive. And it is actually aiming at getting, let's say, the entire human community to closer to a much more friendly and better environment in 2030, let's say, to save the planet in the most positive manner, while 2030 is a kind of an ultimate, let's say, milestone from many points of view, as we're going to see next. So next slide. Rudy Schubert has already mentioned this story about the Marine Systems Coordinating Committee, who has already launched and developed several standards. And nowadays, despite the fact that we actually have a very limited number of members compared to other working groups and societies, we develop quite a great number of standards, rules, and participate actively in conferences and so on. Next slide. Yes, Rudy has also mentioned this story about sustainable maritime, which is actually a kind of pre-chamber before, let's say, the status of getting to a new standard effort or whatsoever. And actually, this is something that it is about 2 years and 2.5 years old nowadays, trying to get more people that are favorable to the maritime business to get to know each other, and in all cases the common denominator is electrification. Next slide. I believe that also this was mentioned by Rudy before. There is a great variety of issues that are actually addressed both by the Marine Systems Coordinating Committee, but also from the industry connection that it is entitled Sustainable Maritime. For the time being, we are focused particularly in shipping and ports and so on. So next slide. Yes. Now, I would like to start, let's say, giving the background, saying that, let's say, and it is a good coincidence that we are hosted actually by the United Nations Organization Agency here, under which is also the International Maritime Organization, IMO, which has a tremendously and ambitious, tremendous effort, makes a tremendous effort, let's say, to reduce the already small, let's say, emissions provoked by ships. But the idea is that we are in need of the maritime transport because it covers something about 90% of the international commerce. So despite the fact that maritime sector is responsible only for about 4% or even lower to the global atmospheric pollution. Still, this is something that was supposed to be increased in the future unless we were taking some measures. And IMO, along with EU, in most cases in complete alignment, they have decided to take several measures that we're going to discuss in the future. Some acronyms that we're going to see, it's the Marine Environment Protection Committee, MEPC, or the set of regulations and directives in European Union that it is called Fit for 55. And among these, the FuelEU Maritime and Alternative Fuel Infrastructure regulations. Now, some of them refer directly to ships, whereas some others refer directly to ports, which of course serve ships and the nearby cities. So next slide. Yes, this is actually where we started from when we have the entire world has realized that instead of let's say making if we didn't make get any measures and drastic measures, actually we had to face an unpredictable future. So this was something that started back in the 1990s, but nowadays we have set, let's say, a target that once again has two major milestones that by 2030 we are targeting at the 55 reduction of emissions, and we are targeting also for a complete neutrality by 2050. Complete neutrality, which means that we're going back to the 1990s where we started realizing what was going on. In all these cases, we're going to see that electrification is the most effective measure, actually. Next slide. So this was actually the set of measures for the European Union that have to do with the climate, energy, transport, and of course taxations that are going to give incentives towards the one direction and not to the other directions, and so on. This is the Fit for 55 set of regulations that are supposed to apply in the European Union. Next slide. The most, let's say, closely related regulations are those that are actually highlighted in this figure. They do have these acronyms applying for alternative fuel infrastructure, fuels for ships, renewable energy sources, energy taxation directives, and emission trade system. Next slide. So what we have seen before now comes once again, but now it is accompanied by the fact that one of the most critical and radical means is this electrification. Now, in this event today, we're going to discuss more or less this shore-to-ship power electric interconnection, considering that electricity is officially regarded as an alternative fuels and is the most readily available, as a matter of fact, fuel that can be exploited towards the sustainable decarbonization. Next slide. Well, that's actually a story that most people might already be aware of, is that we do have already some zones, as they are called, some areas that are, let's say, highly monitored and protected, the emission controlled areas. And very, very recently, only a few days ago, since the 1st of May of 2025, the Mediterranean Sea, where my country, Greece, is actually located, has become a so-called ECA area, emission controlled ECA area, especially regarding the sulfur oxide particles and so on. Next slide. Now, this is a really interesting story which explains why we actually are resorting to electrification. According to, let's say, IMO in general, we're interested in having a completely clean energy chain from, let's say, the very beginning, the well, to the very end, which is the wake under the ship, in the ship waters, and so on. Having, in the meantime, bunkering and refueling and tanks and so on. The European Commission, for the time being, is actually focused mostly on the second part, which is the tank to wake, while IMO is actually focused on the entire chain. Let's go and see in the next slide let's say the complete chain, where you will see also that it's a bit complicated to have all the links of the entire chain, but more or less this is the whole situation. And let's try to focus now on electrification. Next slide. So if we wish to summarize, we are talking about the role of electricity in this, let's say, green fueling from well to tank. Well, we know that nowadays electricity is green, considering that the greatest portion of the electricity produced is based on renewable energy sources. We also know that other alternative fuels are also based on electricity in order to be, let's say, green as well. For example, green hydrogen is produced via electrolysis, which is, of course, based on electricity. On the other hand, we always know, and IEEE is here to support it for more than 150 years of history, that the know-how on electrically related issues is under continuous development, and it seems that it has successfully all the attained goals that it has targeted so far. So if we could, let's say, simply say that if there is a password to this successful path, this is electricity. So next slide. This is just an overview of the configurations that we are talking about, and I believe that Thomas, one of the next speakers, is going to focus on. We actually need complicated infrastructure to be installed in ports, which is actually the key issue, because we need to expand what we know as distribution network within the jurisdiction of the port, within the territory of the ports. And there are actually two main categories. One of them being the so-called shore-side electricity, the pure shore-side electricity, which includes voltage and frequency matching. And there is also a slightly different second type, which has to do with charging, actually, the batteries that are installed in a ship. More or less, but the common denominator is that we supply electricity to the ship, but in a slightly different manner. And above all, there is a good standard, internationally recognized as the ultimate standard to this end, the DAS1, DAS2, and DAS3, and recently the DAS4 of the so-called 8005 series. Next slide. The whole system is being deployed, considering that we do have different ways of mooring in each port, and we need also somehow to install these extra and sophisticated, advanced, but also very compact electrical equipment of high power. Next slide. Having seen that we need to face several challenges, the IEEE in particular, and in particular the European Public Policy Committee has developed and launched a kind of policy document or a white paper setting, let's say, how the future could be based on this, let's say, electrification of ports towards the electrification of ships. And this is actually entitled Smart and Sustainable Ports, because actually what we want to aim at is that this is going to be a mutually beneficial solution, not just an investment to itself, but let's say an investment to a good end. Next slide. Well, the key actually of the key summary of this policy document, which is actually publicly available, and I believe that Karen has already published that, promoted that in the advertisement of this event, is that we start from the policy makers, let's say the governments and the central global governments like IMO and the European Union and so on. And we go to first to the electrical energy players, that they need to supply the energy to the port. It's a major bet, this story, that they have to tackle within a very limited time interval, which is about 5 years or so. In the end, we need to make it the whole project working, operable, and viable, economically viable. And I believe the other co-speaker, Alex Papalexopoulos, is going to make a presentation about it. So next slide, please. What I simply described is figuratively showed in this on this slide. We can see that we do have the transmission and distribution system supplying with energy to the port. We need to have some kind of distribution and dispatching center that could use all the available power sources in the neighborhood, in the area, so that we supply these huge amounts of energy required by several ships. By all means, we know that we do have, let's say, this decarbonization in the entire grid, national, international grids, and so on, which is nowadays consists of batteries, renewable energy sources like PVs and wind generators, while we do have other e-mobility applications, like, for example, electric vehicles and so on. Next slide. Okay, to this end, let's say we need to develop, let's say, a holistic plan within the port nearby to be able to support all these smart and sophisticated activities that include these stories that are very well known in the electricity scientific areas, like, for example, demand side response, regenerative braking, flexibility, and so on, in order to have, let's say, the matching of demands with the availability, the power available, and so on. This is, we tend to call it, let's say, along with my friends, as the Proteus plan, at least here in Greece. Next slide. And if we need to summarize, let's say, and give some hints about the next issues, there are technical issues that we need to address, financial issues, regulatory issues, and of course, educational issues, because we need to train people in this new sector. That's why we have actually introduced the idea of that we need to have a new type of electrical engineers that have marine knowledge, marine engineering knowledge, as well as port engineering knowledge. And actually, next slide. Well, just reaching the end, I wish to thank, let's say, all to pay acknowledgement and that I am indebted to several organizations, including not only IEEE, but also the European Commission, the European Seaport Organization, and so on, and several European, in particular, projects that have run and actually have helped me to develop this knowledge that I'm to present today. And the next slide, I think, concludes this part. I would like to promote, let's say, an effort which is under the auspices of the European Commission, and it is a work stream on the shore-side electricity, the OPS. I have been honored to be appointed chairman of an expert group that is going to, let's say, try to identify and resolve several problems that are supposed to raise during the implementation of this story of cold ironing throughout Europe in particular. And I'm very pleased that organizations like IEEE, IMAR, STI, ISO, AMPP, and so on have expressed their wish, let's say, to endorse and support substantially this effort. And I think that this concludes my presentation. Next slide, Karen. Yes, thank you very much. I will be happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Okay. Thank you very much, John, for that great presentation. As John mentioned, if you have questions, we'll please hold those to the end when we do our Q&A session. So we're going to move on to our next speaker, and our next speaker is Thomas Hoven. And Thomas, he's from Siemens Energy, and he will be talking about standardization of marine utility connections, current status, and the way forward. So please welcome Thomas.
Yes, thank you very much, Rudy. I'm honored to be allowed to speak here today. And I'm also the convener of this joint work group that is a joint effort between IEC, IEEE, and ISO to develop standards for marine utility connections. And when we say utility here, we mean electric connections. Next slide, please. So I put up a small agenda here. I'm briefly going to explain what marine utility connections are and some relevant ship types. I'm going to say a few sentences about how we do standardization work. The overview of the marine utility connections will be the main message from me today. And I will, towards the end, also touch some dilemmas and issues, and also how we work and how our work can be seen in relation to the work done by the International Maritime Organization. I'll have a few words in the end on commercial considerations as well. Next slide, please. So what is a marine utility connection? I mean, John has explained that in more detail. And as he said, it's to connect a ship to an external source, usually grid supply from shore, but recently we've also seen some interest in supplying power to ships from offshore wind farms. So that's why we now call it marine utility connections rather than utility connections in port, because it doesn't necessarily have to be in the port. So it could be powering the ship to allow it to stop its onboard diesel-driven generators, or it could be charging batteries on board the ship, or for hybrid vessels, it could be both. And I've included here some terminology because we need to know what we call these parts. But the illustration is from an IEC standard, and it's the very basic concept of connecting to power in port. Next slide, please. So why do we do this? Well, we have touched it already, and it is about going green and reduce emissions. And there are two aspects, or there are many aspects, but the two main ones. One is the global greenhouse emissions. We need to reduce those. But we also need to look at the local benefits. And you see in the picture to the right that emissions can be a serious problem locally as well if you have large or cities with large ports. So, and there are also other benefits about introducing this, and that's less noise and vibration, reduced maintenance of onboard generators, and fuel savings. Next slide, please. Standardization is complex because there are so many different types of ships, and of course they have very different needs. The sizes range from big tankers and bulk carriers to small fast ferries, and some travel distances of a few miles and others travel thousands of miles. So they need different solutions both in port and on its voyage. And on the right side, 3 of those ships are pure electric ships, so powered by battery only. Next slide, please. I mean, to put some text here about the 3 organizations involved in the 80,005 series of standard. The International Organization for Standardization, ISO, IEEE has been presented already, and IEC is based in Switzerland, while IEEE, as you know, is based in the US. And IEC has national committees, and the one at the bottom, the NEK, is the Norwegian member of IEC, and it's through that organization I'm a member of IEC. Next slide, please. Well, quick about standardization work principles. In both IEC and IEEE, it's about individual personal memberships. That's how you get to work with standardization. We have some rules on code of conduct. We try to achieve consensus. We don't want to have hard votes on solutions. We try to discuss and find the best solution. So we respect others and behave ethically, and also respect confidentiality, patents, and copyrights, etc. So Joint Work Group 28 is a joint group formed by members of IEC, IEEE, and ISO. Next slide, please. So we have currently 3 standards that are published, and we have a 4th that we are starting to develop recently. So 80,005-1, 2, and 3 are both, all 3 of those cover electric connections using alternating current. That's the kind of current you have in the national grids, transformed to the voltages needed by the ship, and sometimes you need to convert the frequency. So we will be coming back to those in detail, so that will be the main part of this presentation. And then we have -4, it's about DC shore connections that John also mentioned. So next slide, please. So 80,005-1 has been around for almost 15 years now, and it's internationally recognized and used worldwide, particularly in the cruise industry for container ships and ro-ro industries. So that is the standard to go by if you plan to develop ports or build ships to use shore power connections. And for those ships, we're not seeing any major changes to the standard, although we are revising the 80,005-1 these days. But for those 3 ship categories, there will be no changes, really. We are planning to introduce some more ship-specific annexes, because this standard has a general part and a part specific to each ship type. So the only annex that will be revised significantly is the one for tankers. So we plan to present a revised draft later this year for -1. Next slide, please. -2 is for data communication, monitoring, and control, and we get very little feedback on that one, and it's seeing limited use. So I'm not going to spend much time on that, and it has been out for quite some time. There are no plans for an update. Next slide, please. And this is when it comes to future development, because this standard was published quite some years ago. It is not really considered a full-fledged standard, so we call it a public available specification. It was, or that old revision was built on the same concept as the high voltage with ship-specific annexes. That will change. We will move away from ship-specific annexes, and there will be a one solution fits all. So that's going to be a major change, and it's in the final process of being published. We have agreed on all the technical content, and it's just having the final editorial fixer-ups, and it will be published hopefully by the end of this year. Next slide, please. This is about DC shore connection systems, and you know the Siemens family of companies have been around for a long time. So I had to include this picture of an electric boat from 1886. So that is a DC shore connection, but it's a long time ago, and we have to start basically over again for DC connections to ships, typically for ships that have batteries on board or batteries as part of a hybrid solution. We have done quite a lot of work and find that this is a significant task. We have looked at what has been done in the automotive industry. I mean, like in Europe, we know CCS2, and in North America, CCS1 and NACS, North American Charging Standard. And those, at least CCS2 has already seen deployment for the smallest vessels. The automotive industry is also working on MCS, that is for larger trucks. That is also suitable for some ships of somewhat larger size. For the biggest ships in need of DC power, we're still at the very basic start to develop the standard. Next slide, please. I mentioned this before. Different countries, for the national grids, they use alternating current. But some countries use 60 cycles, some use 50 cycles. And the dilemma is that most ships use 60 cycles, while most countries have 50 cycles. So that means in some cases, we need to install frequency converters, which will be a fairly additional cost on a utility connection for a port or a connection site. So this is something to be aware of. Okay, next slide, please. This has been mentioned also before. It's about the power dilemma. Do we have the electric power available? And we try to, at least I try to convey this message since I'm working with all sorts of green energy solutions. Power demands, they tend to go one way only, and that's up. We need to design systems that can handle power increases without having to be subject to costly modifications. So there are different, I mean, if you have a port, you really need to assess this and think into the future. Maybe you need to upgrade the grid that supplies the port. Maybe you also need to consider alternative power sources. And that could include batteries and on-site power generation using green fuels. Could also be to allow ships to run their onboard diesel-driven generators as a fallback option. Next slide, please. Another new thing when we connect ships to shore is that ships, they have been living in their own world and electrically have been disconnected from shore. But now we are connecting the same ship in many different countries, and the different countries, they have different regulations, different codes of practice. So that introduces some challenges when the ship has to connect to countries with different rules on how to design electrical systems. So, and sometimes standards have to be made a bit more generic so that they fit more countries. We can't be too specific and exclude some countries. So that is a challenge. Next slide, please. Yeah, I mentioned the International Maritime Organization before, and in our IEEE and IEC standards, we primarily do a technical description of standards and solutions, but we also have some words on how to operate them. But IMO, they are working on guidelines on safe operation, and the future that we are seeing now is that IMO is going to describe the operational part of shore power connections, while IEEE and IEC will describe the technical requirements. So that's an ongoing development. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go say too much about the commercial, but one thing that's important when you do standardization is to find solutions that are commercially attractive. And of course, mass-produced standard solutions will be normally less expensive than custom-made solutions. That's why we, for the DC shore power solution, is looking at what the automotive industry is doing, because they are talking in the millions and we are talking in thousands. But if we can benefit from what they're doing, we can bring unit costs down. When it comes to the commercial part and billing of the energy, that is currently not described, but in the future DC standard, we may be including some of that, because the automotive industry, they have that as part of the charging infrastructure. That is how to bill for the supplied energy. And finally, I would just mention that some ports have seasonal use, making it harder to finance the investment in port electrification. We see that in my home country, Norway, that the cruise season, for instance, they need a lot of power, but the season is short. That is a challenge. And then grid operators, they hate the customer that is there for 2 months, and the rest of the year, he doesn't make any money on his investments in infrastructure. Yes, we're coming to an end. The next slide, please. Yes, that is the end for me. I'm based in Oslo, Norway. Work with the Siemens Energy office there. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. And again, if you have questions for Thomas, we'll take them at the end. So our third speaker this afternoon is Alex Papalexopoulos. Alex is President, CEO, and founder of Echo International and CEO of Zome Energy Networks. And he'll be talking about electrification of ports and vessels and cold ironing for the energy transition and organized energy markets. So please welcome Alex.
Thank you, Rudy. I want to thank the organizers for inviting me to present my work on cold ironing and organized markets. Next slide, please. The material I have put together for this webinar are in the areas of the goals of decarbonization, the creation of smart microgrids and virtual power plants. That's how I call microgrids for ports, virtual power plants. I'll talk about organized energy markets, and participation of ports in those markets through long and short-term products, and how this can help the transition from onboard diesel generation to onshore electricity supply. The objective is to use electricity as an alternative fuel The key question I'll try to address is the cost of supplying the energy services to the vessels at berth. And I'll close with some implementation challenges and some benefits to the grid from the port transformation to energy hubs. Thank you. Can we move to the next slide? The three goals of decarbonization, as I see it, is sustainability, decarbonize, electrify, displace fossil fuel in the supply chain, resiliency, as you of course know, the demand will increase substantially due to AI data centers. We have an aging grid, and we have an uptick of natural disasters due to climate change. So the grid is being stressed beyond its original design. And I view the ports, as we transform them to energy hubs, as a major asset to solve problems for the grid. And of course, the ports will be compensated for those services. The last important pillar of decarbonization is energy justice. It's very important to ensure that whatever we do, we keep in mind that we maximize the energy benefits for all communities. Next slide, please. One thing I have seen, I'm in the energy business my entire career. One thing I have seen over the last 10 years is a drastic increase in demand in electricity. Electricity is viewed the alternative fuel for pretty much everything. And as you see here in this slide, in the US, we produce now and consume more electricity across all economic sectors. And there is an increase of about 50% to 100% for 2050. Next slide, please. Okay, an important area with the ports supporting the energy needs of vessels at berth is to transform them in energy hubs, to make them energy hubs through what I call virtual power plants, meaning the ports, if they have the space, they install their own distributed energy resources. In our business, we call this DERs, distributed energy resources, like renewables, storage, dynamic load management, electric vehicles, green or blue hydrogen. And we create in what we call the ports island-ready microgrids, so they can be isolated in case of a major grid outage from the rest of the system. The key question I will try to address in this presentation is, how do the ports deliver clean energy at the lowest possible cost? And this means participation in organized markets. Next slide, please. This is our business. We can be doing, designing and implementing organized markets over the last 25 years in about 15 countries in North, Central, and South America, Western and Eastern Europe, and Asia. We view the grid basically composed of three components: generation, transmission, distribution. Of course, we have the customers, and we have developed organizations, the grid operators, to manage the production and the distribution of energy. We call those organizations TSOs, transmission system operators, and distribution system operators, DSOs, in the distribution level. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the market architecture that I have been proposing in our sector for the last 15 years. On the top, we have transmission operators. Then we have the transmission distribution interface. And in a lower level, we have local energy markets, LEMs, local energy markets and distribution system operators. So the ports are in the lower part, the green part, because they become DR aggregators, transforming the ports to energy hubs with clean energy to support the energy services of the vessels at berth. They become DR aggregators, and they can participate in those local and higher level energy markets. Next slide, please. The mathematical problem will solve, actually we have spent our entire careers on this. It's a very complex mathematical problem with continuous and discrete variables, and we need to solve this extremely fast in a matter, let's say, of 5-10 minutes. And here we have hundreds of thousands of controls and hundreds of thousands of constraints. The entire grid is part of the market clearing process. At the end, we produce schedules, dispatch schedules, and prices. And we use those prices in order to settle the energy services the ports provide to vessels. Next slide, please. So we transform the ports into smart microgrids and virtual power plants. The implementation for this transformation to make the ports microgrids is very challenging. We need to do this to support commercial activity. And I view the ports in this transformation as DR aggregators, or we call this DRAs, distributed energy resource aggregators, that they will sign power purchase agreements or other financial instruments. We call them contracts for difference through bilateral contracts and peer-to-peer exchanges in order to produce electricity and serve the ships at berth at the lowest possible cost. This is the focus of my work over the last couple of years. And we do this by participating in wholesale energy markets or local distribution markets. And of course, in the process, we pay a fee, the ports will pay a fee to the transmission company or the distribution company, we call the DU company. And as we gain more experience in this transformation for sustainability, more sophisticated financial instruments will be developed. And we have developed those instruments for the last 20 years for other aspects of energy markets. But now our vision is to apply this to ports. Next slide, please. So the PPAs, the power purchase agreements, will be traded with the market operator, that every country has a market operator. And these are standard physically settled contracts with injections and withdrawal objections for delivery of energy in future delivery periods. Contracts for differences, I don't want to spend too much time on this. This is a financial tool that we designed to hedge the temporal price risk. The variation basically of the price that comes out of the wholesale market. And ports and ship owners are exposed to this volatility of market prices, and they can develop those instruments in order to become what we call the seller of a floating rate in order to exchange that with a fixed rate. We have been talking to ports and also ship owners, and a key conclusion from those discussions is that they want stable and affordable prices. And we believe that those instruments provide the stability in the market prices. So the objective is to stabilize revenues. So the contracts for difference essentially provide a financial hedge to the ports and the ship owners. Next slide, please. This is a figure that shows how those contracts for differences work. And I believe as ports develop more expertise in this transformation to energy hubs, they can engage and can ensure stability in the prices of the energy they can provide to vessels at berth. So for those contracts, there is a strike price, which is a price they negotiate with the provider of flexibility. And if the market price goes beyond higher than the strike price, then they pay back. So at the end of the day, that difference, at the end of the day, the price always is constant. And of course, there is a flow in the reverse direction if the market price is lower than the strike price. Next slide, please. Finally, staying on the same subject, to be able to do this, we need regulation. We have developed a regulatory construct, how ports can become energy players and participate in those markets. Of course, we need regulation. Another important aspect of this work is that we want to keep the ship owners whole in this transition, which means if the price, the fixed price through PPAs, power purchase agreements, is higher than the price they pay now for the onboard diesel generation, then there will be a subsidy that we're in the process of designing now in order to provide incentives to vessel operators to make this transition. This is important. So we need some direct subsidies to make sure that the vessel operators will have an incentive to make this transition. Next slide, please. Some implementation challenges. We need the regulatory framework, as I discussed, for the ports as they become energy hubs to become energy participants in the wholesale and local markets. So they become a smart microgrid by themselves or a virtual power plant. Another important challenge is the grid expansion within the port. Some of the vessels are basically a substantial load that will stress the existing grid within the port. So grid expansion is a very important part of this transition. Who builds the grid and who pays for it? These are policy decisions, and we are in the process of developing some rules to develop basically the pros and cons of various options to solve this problem. But the core of the problem is political. Another important challenge is we'll see an increase of electricity demand. So the distribution grids will be challenged. So we need some significant management and investment cost. And on top of that, reorganization of those organizations. Load forecasting is an important problem. The ports are in the best position to have an accurate forecast based on the frequency and the duration of the vessels at port. Education, other speakers mentioned that, and experience is important in this process. And the ports, as they transform, they need new processes, tools, and resources. Because at the end, they will become operators of those smart grids. Next slide, please. So I close with an important area. The grids, as I said, are being stressed beyond the original design of operating a grid. I view the transformed ports as an important asset that, as is integrated in the energy markets, they can provide services to the grid and be compensated for it. That's an incentive for the ports to have another revenue source as they transform to energy hubs. Of course, they need to address a series of technical issues to have this seamless grid integration, but nevertheless, a transformed port into energy hub can help load balancing. They can increase the load when the system has plenty of energy due to renewable energy. What do we do today? Basically, we curtail free energy, solar and wind, because we don't know what to do with it. Ports can learn how to help with the load balancing of the grid by increasing load those critical times, which are usually in the middle of the day. They can also help load balancing under extreme conditions due to climate change. So they can provide flexibility and ramping services, ancillary services and grid services to stabilize the grid and reduce curtailments, which is the control we have today to stabilize the grid. This is a very important aspect that ports can play and extract revenue from participating markets. Next slide, please. As you see here, this is a typical problem, and I will close with this. If you see in a period of, let's say, 24 hours, in a typical day, let's say in the winter, this is from California, and you can see typical, the yellow is the solar injection, the green is the wind injection. If you subtract those curves from a typical load curve over a 34 period, you get this black curve that looks more and more like a duck. And then we have the red curve that looks like a duck. In the middle of the day, as you see, the net load that the grid needs to meet is very, very low. We can see this in the next slide. As you see here, this is a problem that has become a serious concern of policy discussions at the highest level of governments, because our grids are very stressed out. In the middle of the day, we need to do something because we have overgeneration. In the morning hours, in the evening hours, as the solar injections change drastically, we need to support this with conventional generation. That's where the ports come in order, for example, in the afternoon hours, they can ramp up and increase loads in order to meet the grid needs. And that's important. And there are services today that the ports can participate in and extract revenue from market participation. This is important. So ports and vessels, in this vision that I have, by transforming them to energy hubs, they can really participate in the grid for sustainable development. Next slide, please. And these are the key messages. I envision that the ports, with time, they can become smart microgrids for onshore electricity supply via cold ironing. And if we couple those with attractive regulations, we can make this happen. The best way to secure low electricity prices is to transform the ports to energy hubs and allow them to participate in organized wholesale and distribution level markets, which currently we operate for 20 years. And we consider power purchase agreements and contracts for differences of various forms as the best market instrument to secure stable, predictable, and low prices. Of course, the regulatory framework should allow for subsidies in order to ensure that the transition to this reality it keeps the ship owners neutral. And the port transformation, of course, poses certain challenges, but also creates revenue opportunities that are substantial. And I will close with that. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Alex. We have a little bit of time left. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but if anyone has a question, you can unmute your microphone and ask it. If there are no questions, I have a few prepared for the speakers as well, but I'll just give it a minute. Anyone want to ask a question? Oh, everyone's quiet. Oh, I see a question. I don't see the full name, but it's S. Paschalis.
Hello,
Yes.
hello everyone. Hello. Just a question for Mr. Papalexopoulos. According to your experience, have you seen any port worldwide, or I don't know, in US or Europe, having already been transformed as an energy hub and provide energy to the grid?
That's a great question. The ports today, many ports in California, they have cold ironing. They get power from the distribution company, and now there are discussions how we can reverse flows from the port to the grid at certain times when the grid has imbalances, it has problems with how to balance the load. Now, you can do this with certain simple rules, or you can go a step further at what I presented here, go a step further and do this through market participation. This is an evolving process. It won't be tomorrow because the ports today don't have the expertise, they don't have the tools, the people to do this. But there are substantial revenue opportunities for ports to do this. We are living in an environment that the grids are stressed, the demand will increase substantially due to AI data centers. Actually, personally, I'm scared when I see the increase in demand by 30, 40, 50%. We're not able to manage that, especially when we have massive penetration of renewables, and in the mid of the day, we have overgeneration and we curtail free energy. The ports can cover that gap along with other energy sectors, but transform ports can play that role and extract revenues. They can do this in a very simple way by having a deal with a local distribution company. But as time goes by, I view that there will be participation in markets so they can extract substantial revenues from this process.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't see any other questions from the audience at this point. But Thomas, I'll ask you a question. It was touched on briefly, I think, in your talk and John's. Have you experienced any issues with relative to corrosion with the port connections being given the environment?
Yes, we have. I mean, the standards are describing a solution to reduce the corrosion issue, and that is that each ship is required to have what we call galvanic isolation from the grid. That means a transformer or a separate set of windings for each ship. And we have seen people who have developed shore power solutions without that. And on some large ro-ro ships, they had severe corrosion issues. So they had to dock the ships and repair the hull and everything underwater. So they modified the system, the shore power system, and that sorted the problem. So yes, that is a problem. And In fact, our Joint Work Group 28 is now working on a document. We don't know quite yet what it's going to be. It's not going to be in the standard, but it could be a technical report or something about this topic. So yes, absolutely important. And not only corrosion on the ship, but also on the port infrastructure, though, like the steel armor in concrete structures in port, they could also be affected.
Okay. Thank you for that, Thomas. And then I know we're almost out of time here. I'll just put a question out to John. You talked a bit about port electric distribution networks. Can you elaborate on some of the specifics and where the potential is with those distribution networks from standards perspective?
Yes, thank you. It's an interesting new era. We have seen, for example, that let's say the grids are have been deployed in the previous years in a hostile, let's say, manner towards the ports. Or I would like to, perhaps if I could reverse it, the ports are located in very weak points of the networks of the grids. So nowadays we are asking for big consumers actually to be actually connected, or even if they come prosumers, as it was the previous question that answered by Alex. So one key issue is that we need somehow to reinforce the networks. There is a second issue that was also hinted in the presentations, and is that we need to have voltage matching as well as frequency matching, especially in Europe, perhaps not in US because, or Canada, because they have a frequency of 60 hertz, but in most other countries, like it was shown figuratively in a slide of Thomas, we need to have this frequency change. So from this point of view, we need to have a very high power frequency converters. Even better, having this concept of introducing what Alex mentioned before about having, let's say, reverse power flows. It would be very beneficial if these frequency converters were actually of active type, of 4-quadrant type, and even more if they could also support, let's say, battery connections, and become, let's say, what it is a modern issue nowadays of grid forming transformers. So instead of having, let's say, in the port just passive networks and passive consumers, we could actually try to stabilize the network at this very weak point using, let's say, technology that it is under development. And these actually converters could even provide what it is now another modern issue of, let's say, inertia when it is actually non-rotating inertia, when it is virtual inertia, which is actually is not present due to the shutdown of the thermal power plants. There is another major challenge that was actually hinted before in the previous question by Thomas, and it has to do with this prevention of galvanic corrosion. We need to have, let's say, this modern type galvanic isolation that could actually prevent both the corrosion for the ship and the port itself, a very big challenge. And in all these cases, based on what Alex mentioned in his presentation, was that we need this story of digitalization of power. We need smart meters, smart relays that would actually coordinate to one another very well, and so on. These are just some hints that we need to fully exploit of what is now the trend, but we have to have this state beyond the state of the art, let's say, development very soon.
Okay, thank you, John. We're nearly out of time, but I see the hand up, Mr. Pascalis. We'll give you the last question.
Just one more question to Mr. Prousalidis and Mr. Papalexopoulos. We have seen today a series of challenges, and Mr. Prousalidis, just by answering the previous question, is adding additional costs to the port and to the ship owners. However, we have seen quite a lot of installations in North European ports. I don't know about US, Mr. Papalexopoulos, which are already in place. Some ferries are getting power from the port, some cruise vessels as well. How they have solved to manage the challenges over there and the costs of these installations?
For the US, for the work we have done some research for the, I'm based in San Francisco, for the port in Oakland, the port in Long Beach, the port of Los Angeles. In all these cases, there was an upgrade of the grid. There was work with the local distribution company. In Oakland, it's Pacific Gas and Electric Company. In Southern California, is Southern California Edison. In all these cases, the cost was borne by the ports in some portion with the distribution utility. But it was interesting to see that the ports also paid a portion of those costs. The model we have for Europe, I believe, is that the local distribution company will upgrade the grid, and the cost of the upgrade, which in many cases is substantial, will be borne by the ratepayers to a large extent. Now, the question is, what is that extent? Could be 50-50, so the ports can pick up, because we cannot subsidize all these costs and pass this cost to the ratepayers. But on the other hand, we need some causality. The ports can pick up part of those costs too. Again, that's a political issue that is open for discussion. What kind of work can work in each jurisdiction? So that's my response in terms of the upgrading the grid that we need within the port. And in the future, actually, I envision that others, not the distribution company, the local distribution company, will upgrade the grid. There are other energy players and other investors that should be given that opportunity. The law in the United States from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, if there is a need for an upgrade, it gives a chance also to other players, in addition to the local company, the distribution company or transmission company, to do the upgrade. There is a regulator, a local regulator, that issues the tender, and based on the response of the tender, awards the project. And in many cases, the local distribution company is not the winner, which is very surprising in terms of maybe better pricing, even technical expertise. So we're moving to an environment that other players want to get into the grid business. But again, this may not be allowed in many countries.
Okay, thank you.
I see a question from Albert. Albert, please go ahead.
Hello, I have a question for Mr. Hoven, and in your presentation, you mentioned that seasonal use ports makes it hard for marine utility connections to be implemented. And what are some potential solutions that people are working on now, and how they may impact this situation?
Well, this is all about financing, and I mean, the installation basically costs the same to install, whether it's going to be used 2 months a year or all year round. What we have in Norway is a government body that subsidizes the first couple of installations quite significantly, and because it's also an element of unknown technical challenges here. But once those first 1 or 2 places have been developed and built, and they see that it is actually working, then there will be legislation that require you to connect. So like, for instance, the cruise ships, there will be requirements that they do connect in, I mean, I think it's about a couple of years from now that they do have to connect. It's still being debated, but I mean, it's a sort of push-pull, a bit of a push with the government subsidies and a bit of a pull with legislation. So, but it works quite well here, and we have quite a few ports now with shore power connections. And if it is technically challenging, it's easier to get support for something that's new and a bit uncertain. I hope that was an answer to your question.
Oh, yes, thank you.
All right, I don't see any other questions. I know we've run a little bit over. So I think at this point, we are going to close the session. I'd like to thank our speakers, John, Alex, and Thomas in particular, for your excellent presentations. Thank you for all the attendees and those who asked some good questions as well. With that, again, we thank you. I believe this recording will be available at some point. Thank you again, and we wish you all a good day and a good evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.